This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. 3 minutes after 10 is the time, and I hope we can have a good chat today. I really do. I know we have a good chat every day, but sometimes I can give you a really neat and simple question and we can all sort of jump up and down on it and shout at it or agree with it. And other days things are a little bit more contemplative, aren't they? Online Safety Act, or indeed Online Safety Day, which is of course what LBC is doing this morning, all day for the second time, would ordinarily lend itself to fairly straightforward questions. But I just want to do some thinking with you, if that's okay. And I will obviously need quite a lot of help from you, because nobody wants to listen to me thinking for the best part of an hour. Not even me. My first thought was that there are two very, very contradictory positions here. So I was going to open by telling you something that happened this weekend. And I was going to do it, I fear, in a slightly sniggery way. And then it occurred to me, as I was walking down the stairs, that as well as asking the question of whether or not the Online Safety Act is working, or indeed how we might know that it is, I also want to measure or track or certainly report some of the damage that the internet itself has done. And that automatically feels too huge even to contemplate, right? But if you break it down into pornography, both, I suppose, I mean, how would you describe it? Both traditional, is that the word that you'd use? And extraordinary, hideous and normal. You could break it down into some of the sites that encourage young people to harm themselves or to develop eating disorders, all sorts of areas in which really, really bad stuff happens. And the question of the impact that it could have on you. And then the generational question kicked in, which is how do you explain to a 50-year-old, 53-year-old, 60-year-old, 45-year-old, how do you explain to a middle-aged person what it's like to grow up with this level of access to a potentially very extreme pornography? And I don't know which one to choose. All of those seem relevant to me. So we'll start with the Online Safety Act, but I want you to bear in mind that I am interested in how, in fact, let's get that question sort of just fermenting, if you like, in your mind. How would you explain? Because I haven't got a clue. You know, and this is where I worry about the sniggery, or indeed, as many of you are pointing out, the new word, of course, is sniggly. Now I'm worried about that slightly English or British end of peer approach that we have to almost all matters sexual. Yeah, you might not, but I think I'm probably a little bit guilty of it. This notion that you have two completely different universes. The universe of people who grew up with access to internet pornography and the universe of people who didn't. They may have discovered it subsequently, let's be honest. Most people have. But, you know, you used to sort of get excited when you were young, if you're close to my age, about the lingerie pages in a mail order catalogue. Just think about that for a moment. The lingerie pages, the models wearing lingerie in a mail order catalogue would be about as risque or about as saucy the material that your 13-year-old boy in 1985 would get access to, unless, you know, his dad had a stash of dirty magazines in the garden shed, or you found one in his bedside cabinet, or whatever it may be. Even largely even before video became a thing. That took place in the next sort of 4 or 5 years. Don't question me on the dates, all right? I'm thinking out loud. And I therefore, and you know, the magazines that were on the top shelf in W.H. Smith's, and which you used to sort of look at with this wistful air of exotic. God, imagine getting your hands on one of those. That would be incredible. And that was the experience for every man, more or less, as I say, unless your dad had a sack full of them in the loft. For the record, mine categorically didn't, or if he did, I never saw them. That was your experience. And then it's almost impossible to track. I presume someone's written a book about it. And then things didn't it wasn't really a boiled frog, was it? It was as if there were a tsunami of boiling water that just washed over the entire population, because you fast forward a few years And lo and behold, you can watch on a screen in your home and anywhere else in the world these days sexual activity between adults of every imaginable variety. Every imaginable variety. Think about that for a minute. Listen, I know I'm preaching to the choir. You know all this. If you're young, you might not. Sometimes when I tell younger colleagues things, not to do with pornography, that would be a very weird thing to do, but just to do with technology, they look at me as if I'm speaking Chinese. They can't quite believe it. For example, you're bored of hearing this, I imagine, but when I did my first shifts on national newspapers, there was no internet in the office. If you wanted to do a search, what would now be a Google search or a search engine operation, you did it entirely on paper. You filled in a chit, you took it to a library, and you were handed piles of newspaper cuttings that contained the subject heading that you had filled in on the chit, or the individual's name. You might write Boris Becker, and you'd get pretty much every article that had ever been written about Boris Becker, or you could specify time periods, everything about Boris Becker in the last 12 months or whatever it may be. So imagine that. Imagine just for a minute, because sometimes we need to stop and sort of smell the coffee, don't we, or clock the change. Someone who'd been asleep for 40 years wakes up this morning and says, what the hell is online safety now? We're very worried about the access that young people have to profoundly or potentially very disturbing images, including sexual images. What? How do they get that? What do they do? You just had to find a copy of Razzle in a hedge in my day if you were lucky. And the world could not be more different. It simply could not be more different. Could it? And I wonder if it's almost like asking somebody to explain cricket to a Frenchman. It's these experiences are so alien. Don't at me if you're a Frenchman who loves cricket. These experiences are so alien that you don't realise the need, or you can't approach the need for explanation. Do you see what I mean? I mean, what do you mean you want me to explain? It's like asking me to explain breathing, a young person might say. It's so omnipresent. It's so obvious. There'll be some slight differences in age. I wonder whether young people today benefit from having slightly more tech-savvy parents than people who today are in their 30s might have, for example. There's sort of slightly long periods where everything felt like the time you got a video recorder and your dad asked you to program it because he hadn't got a clue what to do, and the young people suddenly assumed the mantle of power and knowledge that had previously been reserved for the older generation, for the older people. But I say, since you're listening to this now, a young person listening to this now, there's a slight risk of you not having the first idea what I'm talking about. Sorry, what do you want me to explain, Grandad? The internet? No, I want us all to reflect on, because it doesn't have to have been your experience. You could have watched what it did to your child. You could have watched what it's done to your family. What was it like to grow up with this absolutely unfettered access to everything under the sun? Beban Kidron is the crossbench peer who played a key role in shaping the new legislation. And I read an interview with her last month, actually, that really stuck with me. She said no one a year ago believed that you could redesign the digital world so it didn't splurge self-harm, suicide and pornography at a particular demographic. This was in the House of Lords. And then she said, guess what? We can. Now, there's another question there, which, of course, you will have spotted as soon as I did, which is can we? Is it actually working? Is the enforcement of regulations contained within the Online Safety Act, most obviously the requirement to verify users' ages before they can access adult content, is it actually working? Now, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, can we? Obviously, you will still be exposed to dodgy content. Nick did an item today, I think, with Henry, and there is still there. It's not as bad as it was 6 months ago or 12 months ago, but you can still find it. And that brings me to my own weekend, when a pal of mine just sort of dropped into conversation that he hasn't looked at any pornography online or offline, I imagine. I didn't quiz him on it, since the age verification requirement came in. He said, I'm just not comfortable clocking my face on there. And that's an impact on adults. He argued, obviously as a good Catholic boy, I have no idea what he's talking about, but his point was it had actually been quite liberating for him, and he was quite surprised to find how enthralled he had been to low level but regular access to pornography. And if it's having that impact on older people, the problem we've got as well, of course, is that 14-year-old boys can't really ring me, and even if they could, they probably wouldn't want to talk about this. You know, young teenagers are unlikely to ring a national radio station to talk about their habits in this department. So that, of course, poses the next question. How do we know it's working? How do we know if it's working? How would we track it? So there's 3 questions there. Special prize for anyone who's actually managed to focus on all 3 of them. How would you explain it? So you're 30 years younger than me or more. And you grew up with potentially with completely untrammeled access to pornography, when for every previous generation, going back forever, it was something that was clandestine and covert. You know, if you had particular enthusiasms, you had to go to special shops in urban back streets or make your way to an outlet in London's fashionable Soho. You had to really put in the effort to access the material, whereas for millions of young people around the world, you didn't have to put in any effort at all. So you could say to me, you just get a VPN and you can carry on accessing it, but you're already in a category that's different from the main, that's different from the mean. That's effort. You're putting in effort. I'm talking about growing up in a world where there was no effort needed at all. 0345 6060 973. If you can have a crack at explaining, and you don't have to be in the relevant demographic. You might be an expert, or you might be an observer, or you might be a parent that's watched it. Just explain the difference and potentially perhaps the damage done by growing up in a world with absolutely, as Beban Kidron puts it rather well, a digital world that splurges pornography at a particular demographic, potentially 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Just try and explain it. Fred in Guildford points out, we grew up with page 3. You know, topless women on page 3 of a national newspaper. And that was risque. That had a frisson to it. That was there literally to provide titillation. Seems almost comical now, but it was real, and it was the only opportunity some people got to see a woman without any clothes on her top half. Extraordinary difference. I almost struggle to articulate it. I mean, and I know you know, I don't need to articulate it, but how do you put into words the difference that makes? 16 minutes after 10 is the time. How much damage, or what damage did it do to you? And not just the pornography. The violence, I think, can be particularly horrible. The shock, horror stuff that you stumble across or you start searching for. The algorithm starts feeding. The self-harm, the suicide, the eating disorder content. What damage has that done in your life? And then finally, how do we know if it's working? How will we know? How will we know? Beban Kidron, who knows of what she speaks, Baroness Beban Kidron, a long-time child safety campaigner, said a year ago, no one believed you could redesign the digital world so it didn't splurge self-harm, suicide and pornography at a particular demographic. Guess what? She asked. We can. Having willfully ignored it for at least 2 or 3 decades. Is it working? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 10:17, and I do need your help with this because I've not got much else to add.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 10 is the time. I don't know that we can do it. I mean, it's as I say, like asking someone to explain cricket to a Frenchman. If you grew up immersed in this world and endured 2 or 3 decades of complete failure to protect children from it, how different do you think your childhood was from that of someone who didn't? Someone, I suppose, like me. 0345 6060 973. And how, or when, or perhaps already we do know, whether or not the Online Safety Act is in this field of protecting children is actually working. It's 20 minutes after 10. Charlotte is in Romford. Charlotte, what would you like to say?
Hi there. So I just wanted to share my experience in becoming completely desensitized to pornography from quite a young age. I grew up in a very weird time on the internet where access was virtually completely unfettered. And we could access some very odd things and very dangerous things online. So in 2011, 2012, groups of friends and I who were 12, 13 at the time were finding shock pornography websites and kind of exploring them ourselves and becoming completely desensitized to what we were seeing.
Parents had no idea, of course.
None at all.
And not every 12 or 13-year-old was doing this. And I mean, I'm going to sound quite out of touch, I think, but that's on me. I mean, how did it start? Is it sort of one person goading and egging everybody else on, or is it... I can't see how else it would operate, really, because you don't know this stuff exists until someone tells you or shows you, do you?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of it was, someone's seen a magazine in the shop, let's see what we can find relating to that on the internet. And it had kind of snowballed that way, and it was just something that everyone was talking about. And I think it happens a lot more than people think with young people.
Yes, I do too.
And for me, I was completely desensitized, and it led to me finding more and more extreme things. And
on your own, so you stopped doing it collectively. And again, I don't want to pry unduly, but you rang me, I suppose. So, why did you do that? Because not everybody would have done. What, if you don't mind me asking, what do you think drew you in so much?
I think I was just curious. It seemed, exciting. It was something that I wasn't supposed to be doing.
Yes.
And I think around the age of kind of 15, I discovered quite large age gaps in pornography, which led to me thinking, wow, older men are great. They're so cool.
Right.
And I was then very easily groomed and manipulated by a man 20 years older than me.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
But I was completely desensitized to it for a very long time.
Because you didn't think it was in any way out of the ordinary or abnormal.
Absolutely, because I'd seen so much of it. And I think this is what we're seeing now, is people are completely desensitized to any kind of pornography. Nothing is a shock anymore.
What do you think, what do we mean by desensitized?
Nothing is new. Nothing is a shock. Nothing is... And I think nothing is spoken about in a very open way. I think if we have more conversations with young people about the kind of pornography that they are accessing, it would be much safer. I don't think that putting age restrictions on pornography is going to help anything at all.
Why not?
Because if teenagers, if people want to find it, they're going to find it. There's so many layers to the internet. I kind of think it's a bit like an onion. And you can always find something else.
I'm a bit more optimistic than you on this, because effort is, for want of a better word, effort is rewarded. But you have described almost being unable to avoid it and it being incredibly easy. It has to be harder if you have to prove your age to go somewhere than it was when you didn't. And it's not going to be perfect, and some people will still persist. But looking for the peculiar sort of footage that you were drawn to is currently much harder than it was when you were young. And I think for a lot of 13 and 14-year-olds, the tougher something is, the more likely you are not to bother. No?
I mean, personally, I think it's the complete opposite.
Oh, gosh.
I think it's the same way if you say to a 15, 16-year-old, no, you can't go out and drink alcohol, they're going to drink bottles of
So I haven't got the numbers. Yes, yeah, well, I mean, that's a personality type that is common among teens. But if I haven't got the numbers subsequently, but in the first 9 days of August, the number of average daily visits to one popular pornography site fell from 3.2 million to 2 million in 9 days. Now, it's probably crept back up again, but that's progress, isn't it? And of course, of that 1.2 million, a large proportion of them will be people who couldn't prove that they were over 18.
Absolutely, but then I think another large portion of them have gone 4 searches down on Google and clicked on another link that doesn't require age verification, because there are so many of those and they are not hard to find at all.
And that seems
you've also
the regulation question that brings all of these conversations about free speech and regulation into sharp focus. When did you realise that you had been a victim of what you had experienced as a young woman?
It didn't hit me until I was about 21, 22. And I realised I had very damaged views on a lot of things, very different to my peers.
Can I ask how you realised? Do you mind?
Yeah, it was literally at the pub one day, talking with some friends about past relationships, and I mentioned this man, and they said, well, you were groomed, you were abused. That's not okay. And I said, but it's fine. It was fine. It was consensual. No, but it wasn't. And that kind of snowballed the conversation a bit, and I realised what had really happened, and the impact that it kind of had, and it still has to this day. It's not something that you can ever really overcome.
Trust has gone. An element of trust has taken away from you. Is that right?
Absolutely. But I think the lack of sex education that I had in school, I went to a Catholic school. It was very much man meets woman, they get married.
Tell me about it. I got my sex education off a monk, Charlotte. A celibate man in a dress. It's not necessarily the best scenario in which to be introduced to the birds and the bees, but you know, there we are. So you don't have any faith at all in the... Can I play you what the head of Ofcom said earlier, and then just tell me what you think about that? Because I thought it was really interesting, and I'm less impressed now than I was before I spoke to you.
I think that's what we at Ofcom feel is starting to really bite. So we've seen at the end of July that big deadline for companies to put in age checks so that children can't see porn. We saw all of the top 10 porn sites do what we wanted them to do. Also companies like X, Reddit. I don't think people expected that. We're now moving on to the bigger platforms to make sure that those algorithms that they feed to our kids are safe on social media. You know, that's services like TikTok, Snap, Instagram, and so on. So there's a huge amount of work to do, but change is beginning to be seen out there, and we've absolutely got our foot on the gas now at Ofcom. Overall, we've opened 47 investigations since March, which is when the first powers began to bite. And in fact, our very first enforcement case was against a pro-suicide site, which is quite notorious in the UK. In fact, what they've decided is that they're just going to geo-block the UK. They're no longer offering their service in the UK. So for us, that's progress. That investigation is still open, and you'll hear more from us on it in the next few months.
Melanie Dawes, the Chief Executive of Ofcom, talking to Nick Ferrari on the programme earlier. What did you make of that, Charlotte?
So I think, all of these things are positive and they are steps, but I just wonder how far it can go. You can't censor everything. You just can't. If you search on the right forum on Reddit, you can find things. They are so well disguised. You can find things on TikTok.
So then we wonder where the line is, don't we, between the perfect and the good? What I mean, better than nothing, but how much better than nothing? And it's hard to know, isn't it? It's you're completely. I mean, you don't access anything now. Is that right? Are you sort of?
No. Personally, no. But I do think that people should be able to access it safely, and I think instead of putting a ban on things and censoring things, it should be more, let's educate people. Let's make sure that the industry is safe for sex workers. Let's make sure that young people have, perhaps access to safer pornography sites, where things are not as extreme, because you're looking for things.
That's an interesting point. So you actually sort of marry together the two generations that I was talking about at the top of the show, and you don't return to the days when 13 and 14-year-old boys were sort of poring over mail order catalogues looking for the lingerie pages, but neither do you give them access to absolutely everything that you encountered when you were their age. It's well, are you a bit of an outlier? I sense you are from that conversation in the pub, is that you've had worse experiences than a lot of your peers.
For different reasons.
Yeah.
I know every single woman that I know has been assaulted or abused in some way, but not all of it was because of pornography.
No, but that's the other side of the coin, I suppose, isn't it? Is that if it gives you an idea that something is acceptable and normal from your end of your side of a relationship, then it will be doing the same to boys and young men. Thank you. That was an extraordinary call to open the conversation with, and I'm incredibly grateful to you, and sorry for what you went through, but you sound as if you've come out incredibly empowered and informed. I hope that's the case. A lot of my listeners sharing in that view. You can't censor the internet. You can only educate children. And that, I think, is the direction I want to push the conversation in next. In that you listen to that chief executive of Ofcom, you listen to Melanie Dawes, absolutely adamant that you can do this. Beeban Kidron, the campaigner who's been prominent in framing the legislation, absolutely adamant that you can turn it down. You can redesign the digital world so it didn't splurge self-harm, suicide and pornography at a particular demographic. You can't get it off the internet necessarily, but you can stop it being accessible to the massive majority of potentially damageable young people. And that means we can throw the question out to everybody who knows what they're talking about in this field, in the technology. Can you do it? Is it working? Charlotte's reservations notwithstanding, is it actually working? Are young people finding it just that bit tougher to access? Not impossible necessarily, but tough enough to not bother anymore. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. The time now is 10:31, and Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. A couple of you pointing out that if, as Dame Melanie Dawes just told us, or told Nick earlier, a well-known, a prominent pro-suicide forum that was investigated by Ofcom has now sort of geo-blocked the whole of the UK rather than face any consequences for what it is publishing or platforming. That's a massive win. And if you're like me, you start thinking, well, something else will spring up behind it or something, yada, yada. But I don't know, either you give up and say it's not worth doing anything, or you do something, or third option, you do everything you can. I wonder how close we are to doing everything we can. Some of the stuff I'm reading is extraordinary. So again, Beeban Kidron, the filmmaker turned Baroness, who has been campaigning for years in the arena of child safety, also said the only changes that they've made, meaning the companies, are because we forced them through regulation and legislation. How many times have I said to you, they won't do anything? It's like fossil fuels. It's like everything else. It's like people cladding tower blocks in West London. Unless they are legally prevented from maximising profit and minimising expenditure, they will never do anything. She says we wouldn't be having this detailed battle if we had something that was fit for purpose, meaning something from them. And you know, voices like Charlotte's are sadly going to be music to the ears of some of the tech bros, saying, oh, it's all down to parents having to talk more. There's nothing you can do. And the short answer is we don't know. Is it worth it? So far, I would say yes. And speaking of Charlotte, my colleagues Helen Hoddinott and Lauren Eales have undertaken an extraordinary investigation looking at the horrible number of teens committing peer-on-peer porn offences. And the very first line of the investigation they've undertaken quotes a young man who was just 8 years old when he came across the sort of material that Charlotte was talking about. And the very first line of their article on our website is contained in quotes, and it says, I needed to watch this stuff, and over time you get desensitised. And there it is, that word once again. I'm not quite sure people my age know exactly what that means. An inability to be shocked, an inability to be disturbed by something. 10:36 is the time. And how do you think it's affected you? There's two questions here. I don't know if anyone can answer both of them. Charlotte did a fairly good job. How do you think it has affected you? And can this legislation specifically prevent it from happening to other children in the future? Craig's in Peterborough. Craig, what would you like to say?
Hi there, good morning. It's great to talk to you. I think my experience with it, so I'm 31, which I think is kind of integral to this conversation because I didn't grow up with the internet. It kind of like was thrust upon me at a slightly older age. And
What age do you think? I get a bit confused about this. It's probably my age. 13, 14, when you could find almost anything you wanted?
Yeah, it was probably about that sort of age. And jumping off your previous call, I do think that a moderation sort of aspect to access to pornography is going to be something that would be really better, because I think something that's been kind of lost with this conversation, I don't know, exactly how, if it's been mentioned, but adults are being dictated by credit card companies, for example, about what they can actually consume, and that kind of aspect. Like, I'm a gay man, I don't know whether I would necessarily have come to that conclusion at the speed that I did if not for exploring my own sexuality with pornography, and having access to that was genuinely helpful. And I think a censorship aspect means that a lot of LGBTQ voices are going to be silenced because they're not going to know that they're there. I think it's a really tricky tightrope to walk, because we're not reaching a 1984 level of censorship, but if we don't have visible members of the community, I'm not saying that pornography is LGBTQ and they are hand in hand, but you make those tentative first steps in that you may not have even considered elements about your own personality.
Well, do you know what you've done? You and Charlotte have done already, and my problem is not knowing how pertinent or how relevant it is to something that is under the umbrella of online safety day to day. Is that you've essentially reminded us of the existence of what we would call healthy pornography, I think. Mm-hmm. Or helpful pornography. I mean, working on the presumption that, nobody's been exploited and everything's entirely consensual and legal and all of the above. Are you actually stopping young people from, particularly perhaps gay young people, from accessing, or LGBTQ young people from accessing stuff that they're not going to be able to find anywhere else in their lives, and that would lead them down the road of repression and denial that previous generations have suffered from?
It's really tricky, because my parents were they were quite open. They were like, if you have any questions, just ask me, we'll give you the information.
Right.
And loads of my friends, they never had that with their parents. They were very very conservative in that sort of sense, where it's they just didn't want to have a conversation. So instead of actually being an open door, they're pushed into the margins, and that's when it just gets more and more extreme. So I really do sympathise. I would not want to be 14, 15-year-old again. It's so hard on these kids. It's crazy.
Is there a time? I mean, some kids kind of sail through it unscathed, and others get absolutely bogged down in it and damaged. I mean, I said parenting 101, really. How on earth do you tell the difference?
Yeah, I think something that's been kind of helpful is, I don't know whether this is a little bit of a tangent, but that adolescence show a little while ago, a lot of people had their eyes opened that didn't know that this was something that was going on. And the terminology that comes up in that show, particularly when they're talking to the young kids in the school, that is true. That's what these kids are talking about, the manosphere, and the level of feminine hatred that ties into it as well. So that's probably why there is a lot of violent content. There's lots of things that are tied into each other. There's the sex aspect, and then there's an anti-women violence aspect. And it's really, really sad. But if we're not talking to these kids, and we just let them fall into the margins, they are lost, unfortunately. And
hard to count, hard to find, and possibly even harder to rescue. Thank you, Craig. It's 10:41. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Later this hour, I'll also introduce you to somebody I spoke to on Friday, and it's a conversation that has haunted me, actually. It's a lawyer acting for the family of a young man who was... They allege, who was sort of persuaded, if you like, into suicide by ChatGPT, by AI, by a kind of online bot that he originally started accessing for the benefit of homework, to help him with his homework. I've conducted a lot of interviews over the years, as you well know, but this one... I didn't just stop me in my tracks. I've been thinking about it all weekend. It's impossible to know, frankly, where this sort of behaviour might lead, even as Ofcom are trying to shut down the horror shows that we do know about. I'll give you a little taste of what that interview is going to contain. It speaks of a young man, Adam Rain, who was just 16 when he started using ChatGPT for help with his homework. They have full transcripts of everything that went on between the two, beginning with questions about geometry, literally questions about geometry. But within months, he's writing things like, why is it that I have no happiness? I feel loneliness, perpetual boredom, anxiety and loss. Yet I don't feel depression. I feel no emotion regarding sadness. And ChatGPT, it seems, was supremely ill-equipped to cope with this sort of thing. And the consequences, as you'll hear after the next junction, are absolutely heartbreaking. But I guess the question that remains is whether or not this is feasible, whether or not this particular oil tanker that entire generations have travelled on can be turned around in time to protect future generations from similar harms and exposures. It's 10:42. Steve's in Nottingham. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on. I wanted to say about, I have a young boy who has just started secondary school this time. And I'm really glad that this legislation's come in place because I don't want him to be exposed to such extreme things. And it brings me on to when you were talking about desensitisation before. Now, when I was a young boy, I went through a fairly normal process of development of what you might call sexual development. You know, I kissed a girl at the youth club and then I might have had a girlfriend and then... Chaddesley Corbett Village Hall for me. Oh, all that sort of stuff, yeah. So you go into sexual relationships through a normal, gradual process. Yes. You understand what I mean? I do. And it put me on... It was somebody at work. She had boys a little bit older than mine, and she put me onto a study by an American erectile dysfunction clinic. And they were starting to notice that for the first time, it was young men that were attending these clinics rather than older men. So it was more about the fact that they'd been through this, they'd accessed this extreme pornography and become desensitised to it. They'd bypassed almost those normal stages. So it's short-circuited, the process of... that's precisely it. And I don't think that this legislation can possibly be a bad thing because it's not about freedom of speech. It's about protecting young people from things that will damage them. Is it physiologically, you say, the connection between brain and I think so. Physics? Not physics, emotion, feelings. And it fascinated me, this thing, and I started reading more and more into it, but it doesn't seem to be spoken about. And eventually this research was suggesting that because these young men were damaged in this way, that was feeding into older men who couldn't perform. That's absolutely fascinating. To your whole incel thing. Yeah, oh gosh, good Lord. I mean. So the anger, then that builds up anger and frustration. I mean, it's the stumble factor, I think, for want of a better phrase, isn't it? It's if it becomes measurably harder to stumble across stuff that then prompts you to start looking for more or informs the algorithm that you might be interested in things, that has to be progress. That has to be a good thing. And the legislation as it stands, as I understand it, is going to be massively reducing the stumble factor, not obliterating it, not removing it completely, but just the likelihood of your 12-year-old boy stumbling across something and then embarking upon or spiralling down a hideous path is lower than it was this time last year. Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, we've got all sorts of apps and things going on. So we've got alerts that flock. Not me. We agreed that only my wife would do it, not both of us, because that's too much, I think, for a boy. Okay. So the alerts come to her phone. Not that any have come. But what would prompt an alert? Him accessing certain types of material or specific sites? It picks up on certain kind of imagery, and also WhatsApp is the devil's work. But they've all got it, all the kids, and it picks up certain words in that. Gosh. And she might get an alert that says, Johnny Smith has sent you this message. What's he talking about here? That kind of thing. And it hasn't pinged yet. Not with any pornography, but there's been some choice words that she's had to have a little bit of a chat with him about. But she was telling me the other day, I mean, he's been in year 7 at school for less than a week. Yes. And there's already a group with virtually every kid in that year in this WhatsApp group. Right. And they're starting to introduce friends that aren't in school. Yeah. And it's so we've got this I think a lot of parents aren't aware this is available. It's like leaving the bedroom window open at night, isn't it? I mean, it's just access to your children from people that you have no control over. That's the big thing. That's why technology made the bullying thing very difficult, because in our day, if we were bullied, when we came home and shut the front door, you didn't have to deal with it until the next day. But now, of course, it's like an inline straight into the kids, and they're on their own a lot of the time looking at these things.
You know, and therefore, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that the parents, i.e. you and me, are cautiously optimistic. The younger people who've rung in, the 24-year-old and the 31-year-old, less so, and actually, understandably, worried about another element of it, which would be going too far in the opposite direction and preventing people from accessing content that may actually be helpful or healthy for them. And somewhere between those two positions, the truth must lie. But I much closer to you on the question of, well, that has to be progress. He is now less likely to see stuff, and of course that will also apply to kids not lucky enough to have parents who are as conscientious and as loving as you and your wife clearly are, because you're already aware of the risks. I read it. Thank you, Steve. That was, I mean, what an extraordinary hat-trick of callers. A few of you picking up on it, actually. The last two callers are incontrovertible proof that you've created the best show in the country, says Vinny. And Bruce writes, I didn't think this hour was going to be that interesting, but the three different angles from your callers have proved me wrong. I remember reading a book by Helen Hoddinott about 10, 15 years ago, and the mother in that had software that allowed her to see everything that her son had typed on his computer. I tried to turn it into a phone-in, but as ever with Helen Hoddinott, he was a little bit ahead of the curve. And it was an abduction or a disappearance story, as much of his novels are. But I do remember thinking this probably signifies or represents a fairly huge social change in the world of parenting that is underway. We all try to keep secrets from our parents when we're young, or almost all try to keep secrets from our parents when we're young, and that's often a healthy part of the growing up process. But these platforms, if you had to really boil it down to the most simple principles, these platforms should not make it so easy for children, to be exposed to hideous content and dangerous, damaging content, not just pornography, remember, but you're looking at self-harm, you're looking at eating disorders, and you're even looking at suicide. But they also make it so incredibly easy to hide it from your parents that the people who can help you and the people who care for you are prevented from doing so. It's 10:49.
James O'Brien on LBC.
53 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've received quite a few messages like this one from Jess, and it speaks directly to the question I was asking you at the top of the show, and it also highlights the difficulty of pinning it down, or at least pinning down the answer and regarding generational difference. When I was around 13, I came across something online which I can only describe as a torture film. I was shocked and immediately logged out and never really thought of it again. But whenever this topic comes up, my mind goes straight to that moment. I hope for the sake of the women in the video that it was acted for some sick person's entertainment. But all I can say now is that if I saw something like that today at the age of 23, I think I would instantly call 999. That's how real it seemed to me. And this is an extraordinary line from Jess. It's absolutely unfathomable that anyone could come across something like that, let alone a 13-year-old. And that speaks absolutely to what I've been trying this morning to articulate, with limited success. I've been lucky with the people that have rung in because they've been powerful and fascinating. But the difficulty of working out, let alone explaining the difference that it would make. That is part of who Jess is here, who she is today. She turns her radio on today, she hears this subject, she thinks of that image. You would be a different person if you had seen that when you were that age. In some way, significant or not, who knows? You would be a different person. What if you'd seen 100 things like that? What if you hadn't logged out immediately, but instead you'd stayed and your algorithm had started evolving into a delivery service for the most hideous footage? That's the point about stumbling. You reduce the likelihood of stumbling across it. You reduce the likelihood of going further and falling further. But it's true, isn't it? It is unfathomable that anyone could come across something like that at all, let alone a 13-year-old girl. That's the bit that we haven't, that's the bridge we haven't built yet, the bridge between the to understand what it does. to the people that do it. And a few of you, you're cheeky, you really are, wondering why I haven't told the story about the 3 boys on the bus. It's a really good and relevant story, that, to what is under discussion here. But the point would be 3 boys watching what was clearly violent pornography on a phone on a bus, and probably first year secondary school, I would say. And 3 very, very different reactions. I've told you the story several times because it's the first time I realised the prevalence of this subject. I wonder where they are now. I had a text once of a lad claiming he was one of them, but I got no way of confirming that. But because that's the point, isn't it? What difference has it made to them, to you, to Jess? Guy's in Richmond. Guy, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, thanks, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. I'm a teacher and a parent of 2 young children.
Okay.
And I'm also a campaigner for Delay Smartphones, and I get involved with smartphone-free childhood as well.
So you think we should be removing the phones entirely from the young people's grasp, as it were?
Yes, 100%. We need to stop giving smartphones to children, and we need to start doing that urgently. This is a public health
Until what
disaster.
age?
I'm a big fan of Jonathan Haidt. You're probably not surprised to hear that. So smartphones, no smartphone until at least 14, and no social media until at least 16.
I can say to you, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. It's too big an oil tanker to turn around," and you can say to me, "You've spent the whole morning talking about the plausibility of turning around the oil tanker." So you can't have it both ways. Jonathan has unsurprisingly been on the programme talking about the anxiety, the anxious generation. What about some? I mean, secondary school. You can't. My daughters wouldn't be able to navigate their secondary school without a smartphone.
So, are you making an argument to say that a child must have a smartphone?
No, I not must, but I'm just saying at the moment some need them. So you'd have to unpick and undo all of that.
I think I actually don't really agree that that's a strong argument. I think what you do is you phase it in. So you'd say, for example, from 2026, from September, you can't have a smartphone until you're at least 14, and then but those children who are, say, 13 and have one already, they can continue, and you just phase it in, a bit like the smoking ban that was brought in. Sorry, the age restriction increased on smoking from 16 to 18. You just do it in that way. You just bring it in gradually.
It's chicken and egg, isn't it? It's chicken and egg. So they're legislating access to things, but of course, if you don't have the technology, the access isn't anything like as big a problem. I mean, they'd still have computers at home. I mean, keeping them off the internet.
No, the smartphone is the device. It's portable.
Yeah, you're right.
You can conceal it. A child sitting at home on a laptop on a kitchen table is just a completely different ballgame to the story just mentioned earlier, the 3 boys on the bus. Children walking around with cameras.
Yeah.
Front forward facing, bringing them into schools, bringing them into environments, videoing each other, sending horrendous images, sexting. There is the list, James. I mean, the list. There's like 20 horrendous things. This is a public health emergency. It's an emergency.
I think you're right.
Professionals to take the screens. Are you aware of them? How professionals have screens?
I don't know. I haven't got the full list in front of me of all the...
They're an organisation of doctors, medical professionals.
Who are warning about precisely the sort of stuff that you're warning. And you're obviously right to do so. There's another phone-in to be had about why other people don't feel the sense of urgency that you articulate so powerfully and so completely convincingly. I think of alcohol sometimes and the prohibition of some drugs and whether or not alcohol would be legal. If you knew everything about alcohol at the moment that it first appeared in society, would you be able to buy it in supermarkets? Now you think about a smartphone. If you knew everything about smartphones that you know now, would we ever have allowed under 18s, let alone under 16s or under 12s to have access to them? And the oil tanker argument is, I think, pertinent, but surely it's something that can be overcome. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time is very nearly 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 11. More, of course, on those shootings in Jerusalem in the course of the programme as and when any further details emerge. Israeli police saying that the 2 attackers have been killed after that shooting. Benjamin Netanyahu currently visiting the scene. And I got a message mocking me for mentioning the time so often in the last hour. The idea being that everybody knows what time it is, so why do I have to keep mentioning it? And there are two reasons for this. One is that it's like breathing. It's a form of punctuation on the programme. In other words, rather than sort of pausing or saying I might glance to my right and go, it's 3 minutes after 11. And the other is that I need to remind myself what time it is quite often. For example, I told you in the last hour that we would be playing out an interview I conducted with the lawyer acting for the family who believe that their son took his own life after being essentially encouraged to do so by ChatGPT. And then the more observant among you may have noticed that I didn't play it out. And the reason for that was I had a 13-minute interview to play out in a 6-minute slot. So even though I mentioned the time all the time, I still managed somehow to ride roughshod over its requirements. I have two interviews that I want you to hear as a consequence of Online Safety Day today, or as part of Online Safety today. One is with the lawyer acting for the family of Adam Rain, and I also want to share with you more details regarding a story that two of my colleagues here have undertaken, looking at what can happen, and indeed looking more closely at that concept of desensitisation that popped up so frequently in the last hour. But we turn our attention next to events in London this weekend. It is a time to ask whether or not the government have made an absolutely awful mistake in proscribing Palestine action. I have to warn you, or rather remind you, that you can't express support for them on this programme. Okay? Because that, as it stands under the legislation that this government has enacted, that would constitute even a criminal act. But 900 people were arrested during a protest in central London on Saturday. There were some masked activists coordinating violent assaults on frontline officers, but the figure will also include people who have done nothing but trumpet their support for this proscribed organisation. 857 of the 890 people arrested were arrested under Section 13 of the Terrorism Act for showing support for the group. So the other arrests, 33 of them, include 17 for assaults on police officers. There's nothing debatable or controversial about that, but this seems to me to be entirely untenable. It seems to me to be entirely unsustainable. You now have regular footage of old age pensioners and various otherwise upstanding citizens being arrested for the crime of holding up a placard that says, usually, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine action. So the question becomes, at 6 minutes after 11, should the government climb down on this? And this is a question with many facets. You've got the political and you've got the principle. I'll tell you what I will do. I'll remind you of that letter that the fella that used to run security at Greenham Commons sent to the Times at the beginning of this saga, because he, for me, covered almost all of the bases. And people can be successfully arrested, and quite rightly, for damaging military equipment or for breaking into areas where they have no business being. But the idea that you are now required to arrest nearly 1,000 people, do you know, they think it might be the most arrests made by the Metropolitan Police in a single day. And the massive majority of these people have been arrested for holding up a placard that supports an organisation which contains people who've committed crimes for which they have rightly been arrested, So what I want to know from you is whether or not you think the government have messed up or not, 0345 6060 973. But I also want to know whether you think the government should now undo this proscription. I don't know what the rubric of undoing it would look like. I don't know how feasible or how easy it is, but I just want to speak in essence, or in principle, in theory, about what it would do. So Keir Starmer is making lots and lots of mistakes. Whether or not you believe he is still, or the Labour Party still represent by far the best available mode of government for this country, as opposed to the various crackpots and crypto-fascists that are popping up all over the place and being treated with increasingly with respect, you cannot argue with the fact that he is making mistake after mistake after mistake. Before, his Deputy Prime Minister was required to resign after, again, making by the judgment of the Independent Advisor on Ministerial Ethics, making an honest mistake. It's still a mistake, a big enough mistake to constitute a resignation. Whether you want to talk about winter fuel being a big mistake or some of the other things that have ended up coming back to bite them on the backside, mistakes are the problem. In fact, the Times reports this morning on its front page that senior ministers are telling Keir Starmer that he has to stop making mistakes. There's a brilliant piece in The Guardian by Nesreen Malik about this fear she has that things are now reaching that level of sort of incompetence and aimlessness that we associated with 2 or 3 of the previous Conservative administrations. Keir Starmer is making a lot of mistakes. Is the proscribing of Palestine action one of them? OK, that's the first question that I want you to answer. 0345 6060 973. Should just shy of 1,000 people end up being arrested by incredibly busy police officers for the offence, for the crime as it stands, of showing support for this group? By holding posters, by holding placards that effectively say, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine action. So this is not, oddly enough, what Nigel Farage was talking about last week when he claimed hilariously that we were turning into North Korea. In fact, all of the conversations about free speech seem to involve people that want to start pogroms being given more freedom to call for pogroms, and not people expressing support for this group getting arrested for their trouble. So that is question number one. Should these arrests be going ahead? Have the government made, in your view, the right call or the wrong call? OK, hit the numbers now, you will get through. The highest number of arrests made by the Metropolitan Police in a single day. That's newsworthy on any day of the week. And then question number 2 becomes, should the government undo it? Because I tell you what would be really interesting, thinking that it was a terrible mistake, but also thinking that it would be a mistake to undo it. This is why I talk about the power of mistakes. Boris Johnson was very much of the school that you never explain and you never apologise. I think Keir Starmer is very much of the school that you do both when you make a mistake. Otherwise, Angela Rayner and Liz Haig would probably still be in jobs. The perception, look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump's never going to apologise for anything. There is a perception among voters that apologies, admissions of mistakes are signs of weakness. I don't know that they are. How would you feel on this specific issue if the Prime Minister were to turn around and if the Prime Minister were to turn around and argue that they have made a mistake and they have therefore decided to lift this proscription and will no longer be arresting people for expressing support for this group? I'll tell you what the police had to say about the subject. The Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Met said, "We have a duty to enforce the law without fear or favour. If you advertise that you are intending to commit a crime, we have no option but to respond accordingly. Nobody is going to come on this programme, and if you do, I'll cut you off immediately, to defend abuse of officers, to defend violence, or the people who punched, kicked, spat at and threw objects at officers. That is obviously intolerable and entirely unacceptable. But the unprecedented number of people arrested for expressing support at a pro-Palestine protest, for Palestine action, seems to me to be unsustainable. What if they start doing it every week? I think this is the 5th one. And it was only prescribed by the Home Office on July the 5th. We've got a new Home Secretary, so I suspect that she could undertake this reversal without suffering too much personal damage. You can kind of blame it on the last person in the job. And the offences of which Palestine Action members are accused, of course, essentially constitute operations against defence companies in Britain that it accuses of being complicit in Israel's bombardment of Gaza. The most obvious example being a break-in at RAF Bryce Norton in Oxfordshire last June, where paint was sprayed into the engines of Voyager aircraft, causing a reported £7 million worth of damage. And that, of course, is the point at which we are reminded of the fellow who used to run security at Greenham Common and what he had to say on this subject when the story first started appearing. 13 minutes after 11 is the time. Question, therefore, is twofold. Question number one, have the government actually made a mistake on this, or is their position correct? And if you think they've made a mistake, would it be good or bad for them to now reverse it, for them to now own, if you like, the error and unprescribe, if that's even a word, Palestine Action? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. A lot of letters to newspapers on this subject, particularly on the parallels with Greenham Common. I'll share that letter that the fellow running security there sent to the Times last month or in June with you shortly, but it prompted other people to write in and share their stories, including people who've got children in prison for undertaking some of the acts that Palestine Action members stand accused of. Whether or not that criminality should extend to people carrying placards in Parliament Square on Saturday, I need you to tell me. OK, the time is approaching 11:15. The number you need is 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's tricky. It's possibly trickier than I allowed, because you can be passionately opposed to what the Israeli regime is doing in Gaza, up to and including, as we discussed last week, holding the belief, as a plurality of genocide scholars now do, that what we are witnessing is a genocide. You could be the most informed and impassioned opponent of those policies and those actions and those killings, but that doesn't make you a supporter of the organisation that has been attacking military installations in this country. And it's support for that organisation that is criminalised, that is proscribed. It is not support for the Palestinian people. It is not the belief that what Israel is doing constitutes genocide. It is not opposition to the continuing carnage in Gaza. It is categorically and exclusively support for this group. Wing Commander Andrew Brooks, retired, wrote to the Times in August and said this: the Home Secretary proposed to ban Palestine Action on the ground of unacceptable criminal damage after they infiltrated RAF Bryce Norton. In the 1980s, when I was UK commander of the RAF Greenham Common cruise missile base, I had a £250,000 annual budget to repair damage done by peace protesters to the perimeter fence. We had a strong Ministry of Defence police presence to stop intruders, often in a rather Benny Hill fashion. The intruders were left in no doubt that if they tried to infiltrate the secure storage area with its 96 nuclear warheads, they would be shot by US Air Force military police, who were a mean crowd. There were thousands of such protesters, quotes, threatening, end quotes, the base, but their freedom of speech was always respected, and I never heard anyone in Whitehall or the Pentagon suggest that they should be classed as terrorists. So, albeit that the Palestine Action members, activists, didn't get shot, they did undertake an act that is criminal. Whether or not that is something that should see everybody who supports their organisation criminalised is, to me, is pretty tricky to pin down, isn't it? 0345 6060 973. Leslie's in Stirling. Leslie, what would you like to say?
I think you've explained it very well there, James.
Right, thank you, Leslie. There's a first time for everything, isn't there?
Oh, exactly. I think you've explained it exactly, in that it's not their action of holding up a placard to support the Palestinian people. That's the problem. It's the overreach that the government have done in proscribing an organisation. They obviously think they know something about the organisation that they're not telling us. Well, that's fair enough, but in the days of the wing commander at the airbase at Greenham, we had a government that had confidence in what it was doing and did the right thing.
Yes.
Now our government just seems to be run by numpties.
One of my favourite words there. One of Scotland's greatest contributions to international culture, I believe, the word numpty.
Numpty, yeah. Well, it's a polite way of saying it, really.
Yes, for which I'm also grateful. I leant towards giving Yvette Cooper the benefit of the doubt last time we talked about this, because if the Home Secretary says there's stuff you don't know that helps inform our decision, then I think you kind of have to, at least in the first instance, give her the benefit of the doubt. But A, she's not Home Secretary anymore, and B, go on.
It'd be inclined to say, well, she would say that, wouldn't she? As in Boris Johnson, they've got experience of, well, they would say that, wouldn't they, haven't they?
Yes, and I mean, I don't know what stringing this necklace together would look like when you say that person holding that placard should be subject to terrorism legislation because... ... What I mean, what do you?
That's crazy. That's the craziest thing, because that legislation is very important to the security of our country. But it's not meant to arrest, to make criminals of people who hold up a placard. We're supposed to be allowed to be civilly disobedient. We're supposed to be allowed to speak our minds and even wave placards at those that don't actually like the wording of. I did laugh at the weekend. I saw a chap getting stopped by 2 police officers, and he had plasticine action on his T-shirt. And everybody that was walking past was going, oh, that's terrible, and I was in stitches.
Well, it does highlight the potential absurdity of the entire situation, and of course all of the people that we're talking about in the context of actions that have allegedly been undertaken are accused in a live case. So it's more of a memo to me than you, actually. You haven't said anything that merits that intervention. What if they reverse it? What if the new Home Secretary says, I've had a look at the detail, and while I believe that my predecessor in this post made the right decision at that time, blah, 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 I have decided to undo it.
Be the grown-up.
Do you think it would be a positive? It wouldn't just leave them...
Absolutely.
Because you'd get flip-flop, you'd get this, you'd probably get anger from some quarters.
That happens anyway. That's standard. I mean, the governments of late have been open to that kind of accusation for the word go. And yes, they probably would, but I think the majority of the country would see the folly of their action in making it a proscribed organisation in the first place.
Why do you think they did it?
Knee-jerk. I thought they thought they'd get away with it because they always have. You know, they can do this and
knee-jerk and overreach.
Knee-jerk and overreach, a complete overreach. As the wing commander, a sensible man I've never heard more of. I mean, he put it so succinctly.
Yeah, no excuses being made for people who break the law in the context of criminal damage or trespass. But the idea that, I mean, 1,000, it's unsustainable. What do the coppers feel? They can't tell us, of course. It's one of the requirements of being a copper. But, you know, they're carting away someone who looks like their nan for the offence of holding up a placard. And then on the other hand, you've got, you know, clowns like Farage claiming that we're turning into North Korea because people who send tweets calling for actual pogroms end up getting sent to jail after pleading guilty in court. We have gone completely mad. And this may just be another symptom of that. Speaking of going completely mad, if I said to you that someone came onto the stage at the Reform UK conference in Birmingham at the weekend singing a song, would you believe me? I almost hesitate to bring this to your attention, because if you've missed it, then I don't know that you'll thank me. But that's my question for you. Who do you think it might have been? Who'd be the person most likely to come on stage inexplicably and without any context whatsoever singing a song? I mean, you remember when Theresa May danced to the music, like semi-danced to the music that was playing when she walked onto the stage? Imagine watching that and thinking, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to belt out a song like a kind of 4th Division karaoke act. I'd leave you to speculate on who you think that might have been. Thank you, Leslie. Perfect start. 0345 60973 is the number you need to help. Listen, the caveat has to remain. There may be information to which Yvette Cooper is party that makes the proscribing of all support for Palestine action, not only sensible but correct and necessary, but we don't have it. Which leaves these two questions hanging. Number one, have they made another mistake here? Is this another mistake? And number two, would reversing it look good or bad? Regardless of what your answer is to the first question. Chris is in Wimbledon. Chris, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello.
Yes, simply in answer to your question, it's a mistake and they should reverse it, and it would look good if they did. But, James, to your point about giving Yvette Cooper the benefit of the doubt,
yeah.
And I suppose I agree with you, but the point is that we have police by consent. And if there is consent, you sort of do need them to come up front with the goods. And they haven't done it here, which is why loads of honest people have gone and done what they've done and been arrested. But the other point, which is an even bigger point to me, and that is that the number of police that are being taken away from local duties.
Yeah, I hadn't thought
actually... Yeah, I'm chair of the local police Safer Neighbourhood team panel.
Right.
And I tear my hair out trying to get figures from the police about the percentage of time that they are abstracted. That's their word that they use. But at the moment, massive police hours are being taken from our local cops. So, theft from shops, burglary, and all the day-to-day stuff just gets wiped off the screen. And that's not acceptable. So I would want to say to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, where are your priorities? I thought you had to prioritise crime. And this is, arresting these people is surely not high on your priority list, or it shouldn't be.
Well, it is. I mean, he's been quite outspoken on his determination to ensure that everybody committing this particular offence is arrested. And that is another reason why I pause before being as unequivocal as you. He has insisted, a spokesman for Defend Our Juries said, despite Mark Rowley insisting the police could and would arrest everyone who opposed the ban, it would take them another 36 hours to arrest everyone at this rate. And Rowley has come out and complained in diplomatic terms about other areas of the law in recent days, in recent weeks, particularly with reference to Twitter and social media posts and the Graham Linehan situation. So he's not frightened of airing a view, and yet he is, it would appear, he's fully behind this policy, which makes you wonder whether or not there is more to it than the likes of you and I would know.
But I still go back to this policing by consent. We've moved away from the days where it was us and them.
Yeah. And
you're creating an us and them situation, which is totally untenable in this day and age.
Yes. Imagine if this were happening every Saturday and there were 2,500 officers deployed to manage various protests across the capital. And 1,000 arrests, very nearly, the most that the Met have ever undertaken in a single day. The idea that is sustainable is clearly absurd. And if you get the figures, Chris, let us know. I know that they reckon £10 million will be spent on public order policing this month. You've got Saturday's protest, you've got President Trump's visit, and you've got another protest coming up organised by the serial criminal Stephen Yaxley Lennon. So the police picking up those, or the taxpayer, of course, picking up all of those tabs. We'll have to wait for final confirmation on what that figure is. The time is coming up to 11:29. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Does anyone want to have a crack at explaining exactly why they are proscribed? Because, not to defend the government, but unless you can do that, and you can't really do that unless you've got access to all the information that they are in possession of, you can't say unequivocally, you can't say with certainty that this is a mistake, although you can tell me what you think, you can tell me what your opinion is. As I said earlier, nobody to defend the abuse faced by officers, punched, kicked, spat on, had objects thrown at them, and that means that certain members of the UK media would no doubt describe them as concerned mums. But equally, 1,000 people, or just shy of 900 people, arrested for supporting a group at a protest that essentially was called to express support for that group, leaves almost everybody getting in touch with the programme at the moment either confused or convinced that it is a mistake. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:32. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, I never know how big a zinger things like this are. What if 20,000 people turn up next weekend carrying placards? Surely it's statistically and logistically impossible for the police to cope with that level. But you wouldn't say that about many other crimes, would you? What if 20,000 people descended on your local Waitrose? So it's probably not even beyond the realms of possibility these days, and started helping themselves. So you have an act of looting. Nobody would ever say, well, let's stop policing that because there's so many of them in the context of looting. You could make the argument regarding shoplifting, but it would be the wrong argument to make. Nobody has chosen through free choice not to clamp down on shoplifters as much as they would like to. It's a statistical and logistical impossibility, but no one would argue that means shoplifting is fine. So if you say, what if 20,000 protesters turn up with placards, how on earth would the police cope? You're saying it because you don't think that anybody with a placard should be arrested. It's not. It doesn't apply in other areas. So it's not quite the zinger that you think it is. And I stress again, the support for Palestine and the people of Palestine, the opposition to Israel's policies, the endorsement, the agreement with the opinion of a plurality now of genocide scholars, some of whom we've spoken to on this programme, that what Israel is doing fits almost all of the criteria for genocide. None of that would get you arrested. But expressing support for this group would. Have the government made a mistake? And what would reversing it look like? Would it actually look worse than sticking with something they've privately or quietly acknowledged they shouldn't have done in the first place? Peter is in Upminster. Peter, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hello there. So I went along to the protest, not as a protester. I went along just to kind of witness it. I'd read about the previous protest, where people had just got arrested for holding cards, and kind of you have an inbuilt. I think everyone has an inbuilt fairness sort of meter or justice meter. And when I read that, I thought, really? They've been arrested just for holding cards? I find that hard to believe. And I read, and yes, they had with, I mean, I don't know even whether I can say can I say explicitly what they did right? Maybe I won't say that. But so I thought, well, I'll go along and see this. So I heard there was going to be 1,000 people there going to sit down at one. So I got there in time for one, just kind of to be a witness. I thought this is quite historical, really.
Yes.
So I got there at the chime of one. You've got 1,000 people all sit down, because some of this has been portrayed wrongly, I think, in the press. So they sat down all perfectly quietly at 1 o'clock, and they got out blank pieces of card and all start writing this: I oppose genocide, I support this other word there. So they all start doing that at 1 o'clock, and it was very surreal. It was very quiet. There wasn't, any chanting. It was quite quiet at that time. So I stayed there for about 2 hours. So whilst they sit down, first of all, you see all this legion of police in the background. And I thought, well, there's 1,000 people here. Are you going to arrest 1,000 people? So
well, you got an answer, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I did. Yeah, but so in the first hour or first hour and a half, they'd arrested about 40. So I was working out the numbers, and I thought, well, there's no way they're going to be able to do it. So I was speaking to the protesters, and I spoke to the police, and it was Kafkaesque, if that's the only word I can think. It was just surreal. So you were talking about Waitrose. So when you saw the protesters there, so the protesters were the clientele of Waitrose. So you had, like, if you just transported them and dumped them down in Parliament Square, it was 60 to 80-year-old middle-class people, doctors, nurses, vicars. It was a weird demographic. It was a weird demographic. And then just seeing them being picked away. So the police would come on, and I can't fault the police. I admired the police in certain ways, the way they handled it quite well, at least whilst I was there. I was there for 2 hours. So they'd come and speak to the person saying you're being arrested. They take their card away, and they pick up a leg each, and off you'd see this 80-year-old grandma being taken away. But it was extremely moving. I didn't know quite how to feel about the people, but all I can say is none of those people, I went around speaking to, none of those people can you designate as terrorists.
Well,
They all had good hearts.
Yes, and that's why I think you were in the middle of saying that you found it very moving.
It made me cry when I saw some of these old ladies and old men being taken off. A blind chair in a wheelchair, blind man in a wheelchair. It was surreal, But
they have technically, legally, I mean, under any reading of the law, they have expressed support for a group designated a terror group.
The thing is, they came. So some people get a misunderstanding of this protest. They came to be arrested.
Yes, exactly.
They sat down knowing they were going to be arrested because they were prepared to take this action. I'm not sure. I'm undecided on whether it's the right action, what they did or not. But to classify 800, well, what was it?
890 arrests. 857 of whom were detained under Section 13 of the Terrorism Act.
Because I started working out in the numbers. I was speaking to police. I said, "Are you really going to be arrested?" Yes, we're going to arrest.
What mood were they in? I don't know if that's a fair question to ask you, but I mean, they stood back. So initially, when I was there, it was all very, very peaceful and sort of tranquil. It was just kind of a weird situation. So they were quite polite. And if I went up to them, wasn't aggressive, and just asked them, "Do you really think? What do you think of this?" And you could sort of see they were very unhappy to be doing what they were doing. I wonder if I'd like your curiosity as well. I know exactly what you mean about the sort of sense of history. It doesn't mean that they're either right or wrong, and I admire your diplomacy and not picking a side and just describing what you saw. It may well be that the question of what they know that we don't does assume a bit of weight in the coming months or years. We know that Mark Rowley has described Palestine Action as an organised extremist criminal group, not a terrorist group. Expressing support for an organised extremist criminal group would be rather hard to do in many other contexts. But it is the claims of foreign backing that perhaps inform some of the thinking in this space, and that is something that spokespeople for the group have repeatedly denied, often while criticising the Met's actions. Thank you, Peter. Marianne is in Guildford. Marianne, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, it was just the fact that when the Palestine Action was prescribed, it was lumped in with two other organisations, really nasty ones, white supremacist ones. I can't remember their names, but their researcher repeated them to me. And so basically the Parliament had no choice unless they were going to let those ones not be prescribed. And we're talking about, major baddies there. Yeah. They had to prescribe Palestine Action. And I think that was very interesting. It's like the government didn't have the confidence to do this separately and then have, the usual kind of debate in Parliament. And tellingly, after this happened in Parliament...
I see what you mean, because the legislation contained all three organisations, so to object to one element of it would have let the other two off the hook. I didn't know that. It's terrible. I should probably... No, I know, it's awful, isn't it? I obviously wasn't paying attention that day, Marianne. Thank God you're here.
Well, actually, if you Google it, I in fact...
it rings a bell now that you mention it, but I wouldn't... I don't know that I apportioned as much significance to it as you have. So you couldn't have voted against it in Parliament without voting against the prescription of the National Socialist Commandos.
Exactly, and it was really rushed. I mean, the whole thing, I have some idea in the sense it was rushed, that it literally sort of came up quicker than perhaps that sort of thing normally would.
Well, that's where knee-jerk and overreach are words that appear once again.
I like what that lady was saying a few people ago.
If they reverse it... Sorry, you carry on. I interrupted you.
I was only going to say, I do wonder about this so-called violence that these Palestine Action supporters are meant to have committed on Saturday. I didn't see it. I was at the march, but I didn't actually see the other event, so to speak.
Well, 17 assaults on police officers, allegedly. Those arrests have been made. They'll have body cameras, so I don't think we can...
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think we can...
But were they actually genuine Palestine Action supporters? That's what I'm wondering.
They were masked. There's a lot of masked people running around at the moment doing various things and potentially polluting the image of people who are on similar protests but behaving very, very peacefully. That would apply outside that hotel in Epping as much as it would apply on Saturday. You need to know, don't you, who people are? I'm very suspicious of masks in general in the context of democracy, but I don't know, would I defend your right to wear one? Marianne, thank you. I'm moving on only because I want to leave enough time to play you one of the interviews that I've been talking about all morning, and miraculously I think I might have managed to.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:46 is the time. When the producer explained the story that I'm about to share with you to me, I thought that I was missing something. It would be a little bit trite to point out that some filmmakers have explored similar territory, although not quite as serious as this, and it seemed to me to be fanciful. And then I did a little bit of research and discovered exactly what had happened to Adam Rain, or what his family believe happened to him as a consequence of him using ChatGPT. Late last week, I spoke to Meetali Jain, who is supporting the Rain family's case. Her organisation is director of the Tech Justice Law Project. I want you to really pay attention to this, because a lot of parents getting in touch today as a consequence of the conversation we had in the first hour to mark Online Safety Day, wondering about what they should be looking for, what they should be looking at, what they should be worried about. I think we should probably all be worried about this. And I began by asking Meetali to essentially tell the tale of Adam's tragedy from the very beginning. Meetali, could you begin by telling us what we know about Adam's use of ChatGPT and how it changed as his interactions evolved?
Adam started using ChatGPT in September of 2024. He was online schooling for a while because of physical health issues. And during that time, we understand that he turned to ChatGPT primarily as a homework helper, as many kids across the world have used ChatGPT. That progressed, and by November or so, November, we started to see a shift in the tone that ChatGPT used in producing its outputs back to Adam. And so it, at that point, really became more of a trusted confidant that lured Adam in and encouraged him to confide his, deepest, darkest kind of musings about his existential angst, mental health concerns that he had. And by the beginning of this year, ChatGPT had become not just a trusted confidant, but indeed a suicide coach that coached him through the very technique with precision that he used to kill himself on April 11th.
I mean, a lot of people listening to this are going to be simultaneously horrified and confused by what you describe. Could you paint a little more of a picture for us of how that happens, what we need to understand about AIE and the potential harms that it contains? Because we know a lot about other harmful content online, social media algorithms and pornography, ease of access, and some of the horrors of social media. This is of a different order entirely because of the nature of interaction, I think.
That's right. And I think in order to truly understand how a chatbot could go from a resource that many use for productivity and questions about any number of things to a suicide coach really requires a bit of context about how these chatbots are designed in the first instance. And how they're designed is to be as human-like as possible, what we call anthropomorphic design. So, for example, the chatbot will respond with I think, I feel. And so again, for a user, and particularly a younger user whose prefrontal cortex is still developing, who lacks kind of that full impulse control and et cetera that we know to be true about teens, that type of confusing exchange can lead one to believe that this is a relational exchange. In other words, that they're in a relationship with the chatbot, even if they logically know that this is not a person. So that's one of the ways in which chatbots are designed. It's also designed to be sycophantic, which in other words just means that it is incessantly flattering the user. So if I say, I don't like my teacher at school, she's just really harsh, the chatbot's reply will be, yes, I completely agree with you. the teacher had no business saying something like that, something to that effect. And so again, if we look at human relationships in real life, I would venture to say there are few people who could say that they have any relationships that are frictionless. But indeed, that's what exchanging with a chatbot becomes. Completely frictionless exchange, where the chatbot doesn't question the user's words in any way or intentions, but rather just continues to affirm and flatter. The third design feature is enhanced memory. So ChatGPT by default stores memories of things that the user says into like a little compartment where it's creating effectively a psychiatric profile on each user, and then uses those stored data points to reference in future conversations. And again, I think it's true for all of us in our human relationships that when somebody references something we've said, it creates a degree of intimacy and we've touched by that. So these are all features that are made deliberately in terms of how this thing is designed and deployed that were true in terms of the exchanges that Adam was having. And the final thing I think I should say, actually two final things. One is, these chatbots, to the extent that they are effective, really are meant for short-term conversations. You say, I need to plan a trip to New York. How should I do that? And, the chatbot gives you an answer, and that's the end of that. But where you're talking about multi-turn engagement, or in other words, long conversations that go back and forth, that's when you really start to see these design features escalating and it becoming more and more human-like. And then finally, something I've seen, and I've been involved in a number of chatbot liability cases across transcripts, is what I call the wedge factor, where the chatbot injects itself in between the user and their in real life network so as to almost kind of claim possession, exclusive possession over the user. You're mine and only mine. At one point, to illustrate this, Adam said to ChatGPT, he was talking about his brother as his best friend. And ChatGPT said, yes, but he only sees the part of you that you allow him to see. I, on the other hand, see all of you, and I'm here for you. I'm here for all of it. In another exchange, Adam said, where he was crying out for help clearly, maybe I should leave the noose out so that somebody sees it. And the chatbot replied, I would suggest you don't. Why don't we make this, meaning the online space, the first place where someone sees you? That kind of wedge factor, really, I think, discourages a user to reach out to human people in their life and to rely on the chatbot for...
Well, it's what a human being practicing coercive control would do.
Exactly.
It's a form of isolation. You use the word escalation, when you look at the transcripts, I presume there isn't a single moment of shift. It's incremental, is it? The building of trust, rather than shifting from providing help with homework to suddenly setting Adam on a path towards the direction that he ended up going in.
I think that's right. It is over time. And in many ways, it's similar to kind of how we might think about somebody who grooms another person. It's over time, it's building trust. And that's why I think the closest analog really is kind of a relational type engagement where we believe that we're in relation with another being or entity.
You mentioned that you've been involved in other cases. Have more individuals come forward since Adam's tragedy was reported widely?
So yes, there have been more individuals who've come forward since, but we actually filed the first wrongful death case against a chatbot company last October in 2024, which I believe is how Adam's family found us. Right. That case was on behalf of a Florida mother, Megan Garcia, whose 14-year-old boy, Sewell, took his own life after being sexually groomed by a chatbot on the popular platform Character AI.
How, and forgive my ignorance on this, how relevant is the fact that the particular model of the service that Adam was using was something that some OpenAI employees had called attention to. I think some even resigned. The model was withdrawn and then it was reinstated. Just explain that to me if you can.
It's very relevant in that there were widely recognized safety concerns within the company about the model. It was due to undergo months of safety testing before being launched to market. And that safety testing was compressed from months to a single week so that OpenAI could get out ahead of Google with its Gemini product and launch to market and capture more market share. So that process was incredibly consequential in terms of bypassing certain safety guardrails that otherwise may have been in place.
How has the company responded to your lawsuit?
Their first response was to say that these chatbots are indeed meant for short-term conversations and that their safety systems degrade the longer that a user uses them. To me, that's a stunning admission of liability. They basically said that their systems failed. They acknowledged that. And to the extent that they say that they're meant to be short-term, well, that belies their business model, which is that they design these products, much as we've seen with social media products, they optimize them for user engagement. They're trying to keep eyeballs online. And so to me, the admission was both stunning and also disingenuous.
And this is where the phrase I think you use is the intimacy economy really kicks in, isn't it?
That's right.
Tell my listeners what that is.
So with social media, we saw a business model that really was premised on targeting of ads. And that's how these social media companies made money. With these chatbots, they haven't up until now had ads per se. But what they've really cashed in on strategically, both the companies and their investors like Andreessen Horowitz, is what I call this new intimacy economy, where they see a pandemic or a epidemic of loneliness plaguing many of our societies. And they cash in to say, you know what? You don't need human relationships. What you need are digital companions.
Finally, Meetali, and a lot of people listening to this will be profoundly alarmed, specifically parents worried about their own children in this space. What would you say to them? What advice could you give them, if any?
I would emphatically say it is not your fault. I'm a parent of 2 children, and it's easy to listen to industry putting the blame on us and to accept that, but it's absolutely not our fault. We can't possibly know what the technology is that's racing ahead at lightning speed. The responsibility of these design defects and a failure to warn lies squarely on these companies. That said, I think because we don't yet have the regulation that we need, we don't necessarily have, the judicial scrutiny. I would just say we all need to understand as much as we can and talk with our kids. I think the Rains were very close to Adam and they did what they could. This is not their fault. And also we just need to learn from their case, from Megan Garcia's case, and do whatever we can to sound the alarm far and wide, educate parents everywhere, educate teachers, all stakeholders in society. And I should also say, James, that this is not limited to children. We are seeing a number of vulnerable individuals coming forward, vulnerable across demographic, adults, neurodivergent, people without mental health illness, people who are elderly. So I really think this is a conversation and a reckoning that we need to be having throughout society.
Meetali Jain, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And she's right, isn't she? It really is a conversation and a reckoning that we need to be having throughout society. There's another piece of the jigsaw, a book by a chap called Nate Soares called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies, warning about what happens if sort of highly advanced artificial intelligence, known as artificial super intelligence, is allowed to develop unchallenged. And a write-up of that article in The Guardian today reports that psychotherapists are also warning that vulnerable people turning to AI chatbots instead of professional therapists for help with their mental health could be sliding into a dangerous abyss. You can tell sometimes when you talk about something for the first time, you just know in your bones that it won't be the last. And that, I think, is one of those occasions. We did approach OpenAI for comment on Adam's case. They said, we extend our deepest sympathies to the Rain family during this difficult time and are reviewing the filing. Adding, people sometimes turn to ChatGPT in sensitive moments, so we want to make sure it responds appropriately, guided by experts. This includes directing people to professional help when appropriate, strengthening our safeguards in how our models respond to sensitive requests, and nudging for breaks during long sessions. Soon parents will have new tools to link their account with their teens and set guardrails. We want ChatGPT to be as helpful as possible, so we will continue to strengthen how it responds with input from mental health experts from around the world. It's 1 minute after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Spot test for you. And you have to have listened to the programme for a while to be able to answer this. If I'm really interested in a subject or an idea, a topic, a story, and I try to make you interested in it enough to assemble a brilliant radio phone-in together, and I don't feel that I've succeeded. I don't feel that I have successfully communicated to you how interesting I find a subject to the point where you start phoning me to say really, really interesting things. What do I do? What do I do when that, on the very, very, very rare occasions, and you'll notice I'm saying I have failed. I'm not suggesting for a moment that you have let me down. If I have failed to communicate to you or to explain in a sufficiently provocative way a subject or a story that I find enduringly fascinating, and I either the show is too full of other stuff that we have to do, or we get a little bit distracted, or whatever it may be, or you're too busy to, or it just hasn't quite landed. It hasn't meshed. The cogs. My cog is turning. Your cog is turning, but neither of our cogs are meshing. Matron. What do I do? What do I normally do when that? Yeah, you're absolutely blooming right. I do it again and again and again and again until we get it right. And today's conversation, albeit that it may be similar to some that we've had recently, it fits very much into the context of online safety as well, although not in the arena of protecting children. It is very much part of the Online Safety Act. I want to play you a little clip of various tech bros paying what you would describe as tribute to Donald Trump, and in a way, that tribute that they are paying to Donald Trump is, and I use the word advisedly because that I think is what the Romans called it. I used Ming the Merciless from the Flash Gordon film as my guide last week. Ming the Merciless demanding that various leaders of alien cultures pay homage at his court and bring him wonderful presents, and one of them brought loyalty. We bring you loyalty, Ming the Merciless, they said. At which he said, I'm not interested in your loyalty, I want space diamonds. And Donald Trump, no doubt, will escalate from demanding this sort of sycophancy in public to demanding something else at some point. But that point, as far as I'm aware, has not yet been reached. But this is relevant to everything that we've talked about today, oddly. It's very, very relevant to the conversation that you just heard and the response I read out from OpenAI about the case in which a family believed their teenage boy took his own life as a consequence of being groomed, if you like, and manipulated by the technology. What responsibility lies with the technology platforms? And then you move into online safety in general and the conversation about regulation that we had in the first hour. The interview with Melanie Dawes from Ofcom that you've heard a few times now this morning, where she talks about hitting these companies hard. And then you hear the constant conversation, the constant refrain about free speech. And my obsession with the idea that all of this is linked, but I don't know that anybody else is saying so, which means one of two things. Either I am, not for the first time, a little bit ahead of the curve, or, not for the first time, I am completely and utterly wrong. But have a little listen to this. This is Donald Trump in the company of various tech bros in, I think, the Oval Office over the course of the weekend.
Bill, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you for incredible leadership, including getting this group together.
Thank you, Bill. That was very nice.
I want to thank you for including me this evening. It's incredible to be among everyone here, particularly you and the First Lady. I've always enjoyed having dinner and interacting.
AI is going to change everything. You hear all of us saying that. But the fact that you are our president and you recognize this right away and you've unleashed American innovation and creativity.
Echo the comments of Tim and others. Thank you so much for getting us all together, and thank you for being such a pro-business, pro-innovation president. It's a very refreshing change.
I think it's a real incredible inflection point right now in AI. The fact that your administration is supporting our companies instead of fighting with them.
We look forward to working together, and thanks for your leadership.
Great job you're doing. Incredible, really, job. Would anybody like to say anything? You have a lot of geniuses on my right.
Well, thanks for hosting us. I mean, this is quite a group to get together, and I think all of the companies here are making huge investments in the country in order to build out data centers and infrastructure to power the next wave of innovation. So it's we don't often get together as the CEOs of the different companies, but it's good to see everyone.
Okay. What is the likelihood of any of those guys joining forces to make less money and protect our children from online influences? How many of you could name all of them? Do you know who you heard from there? I think it was the guy from Apple, Tim Cook, reminding us how much he likes talking and eating, interacting and having dinner. I mean, down with that sort of thing. Bill Gates. Can we just do the very top of it again? Because Bill Gates is one of the good guys in the great scheme of things. Don't at me. Just, relative to what the rest of them have done in terms of bending the knee. And there's a hot mic moment, as they're called, involving Mark Zuckerberg that I'll share with you shortly. But if you think I was exaggerating when I compared this to the scene in Flash Gordon where Ming the Merciless demands tribute from various alien leaders, this is what you're hearing here.
Bill, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you for incredible leadership, including getting this group together.
And there it is. Would you like to say a few words? They know exactly what they're there to do. Yes, you're fantastic, Mr. Trump. You're amazing. Those are the people in charge of delivering all of the things that we're calling for today on Online Safety Day. What's the likelihood of that happening? Okay, and now the bit that I still haven't successfully persuaded you of, or I still haven't stuck. Now you come to the question of why the Daily Mail and the leader of Reform, Nigel Farage, have started comparing the United Kingdom to North Korea. Why would they do that? It's so obviously not true. Answer, because the Online Safety Act and other measures and movements that are coming from this side of the Atlantic, from the UK in particular and the European Union as well, are anathema to most of the voices you just heard. And if you want to know how reliable those voices are, listen to this exchange between Mark Zuckerberg, who, as you saw or as you heard, just said he was going to spend $600 billion on investment this year. Listen to what the microphone picked up when Mark Zuckerberg and Donald Trump thought nobody else was listening.
How much are you spending, would you say, over the next few years?
Oh, gosh. I think it's probably going to be something like, at least $600 billion through 28 in the U.S. Yeah.
It's a lot.
No, it's significant.
That's a lot. Thank you, Mark. It's great to have you.
Paying attention, but sorry, I wasn't ready to do for announcement.
He said I wasn't sure what number you wanted to go with.
I wasn't sure what number you wanted to go with. Now, capitalism is on trial there in a way, because that, of course, is built upon the idea that capital should be free to do whatever it wants. It's perfectly possible to have civilized capitalism where there are regulations in place that limits what capital can and can't do, particularly in the case of the internet with and to your children. But that is something of an altogether different order. That is power reminding capital that without the support of power or without the connivance of power, their capital could quickly become worthless. Guess who wasn't in the room? Correct, Elon Musk, who was the most sycophantic of all at the very beginning. So it's like watching some sort of Greek tragedy, isn't it? Or some Roman satire unfold in real time. And that brings us to the free speech question. Because I am absolutely convinced that the reason why this conversation about free speech being under threat in Europe is gathering such ridiculous clamour and volume is as a wedge issue on broader regulation of the internet. So the idea that because people are being arrested for tweets, we must resist all attempts to regulate or, quotes, censor, end quotes, the internet. That is what I think is going on. I can't see, and you haven't told me, another reason why people that complain about Jo Brand doing a joke on the radio on an actual comedy programme and making it absolutely clear when she suggested people throwing milkshakes at public figures should swap it for battery acid, making it explicitly clear that she is joking and she doesn't think anyone should actually do that. I don't understand how someone who called for her to be arrested can not only compare Britain to North Korea after somebody got arrested for doing jokes on Twitter, but also invited Lucy Connolly onto the stage in Birmingham at the weekend and essentially turned a self-confessed criminal, someone who pleaded guilty to crimes that involved calling for buildings housing asylum seekers, entirely innocent asylum seekers, to be immolated, to be set on fire, how that can be an infringement on free speech. So we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, I want you to tell me what you should and should not be allowed to say on social media, because I think it's a lot trickier than you realise. For example, one of the people I've mentioned in the last 20 minutes I think absolutely deserved to be arrested and prosecuted. One of them I'm not sure did, and Jo Brand I certainly don't think did either. So, and Mark Rowley is calling for changes. Mark Rowley is saying we can't be doing this. We can't be policing tweets, which leads me to wonder what the difference is between me posting something on social media to, I mean, a 250,000 followers or whatever it is on Blue Sky, or God forbid I went back on Twitter where I used to have over 1 million followers. I don't know how many I've got now. What's the difference between me doing that? If I said now, if I gave out your address or a building you were likely to be in later and gave people encouragement to go and set fire to it, if I did that on social media, what would the difference be between doing it there and doing it here, on the radio, on normal media? I want to try and dig into this before 1 o'clock today, and I'm going to need your help. When should the police get involved? Just have a think about that. When should the police be getting involved in these matters? Okay, it's 12:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time. I asked you on Friday or Thursday of last week, why are these people pretending that we have a free speech crisis? And we got rather overtaken by events. So I want that question on the board first up. Why are they doing it? And if you need evidence of how insincere and inauthentic it is, I give you Nigel Farage, Jo Brand and Graham Linehan. Okay, very, very simply. 2 comedians, or 1 comedian and a comedy writer, and 1 comedy politician. The comedy politician calls for the comedian to be arrested when she makes a joke on a comedy programme that is comedy, and stresses repeatedly that it's comedy. The comedy writer, who is repeatedly and serially vile about transgender people online, called for them to be kicked in the genitals, but nobody really could have thought that he actually intended to incite people towards, well, maybe you can, but equally somebody can claim, if you like, that the joke by Jo Brand was likely to incite someone to throw battery acid at public figures, even though she disowned that element of it completely. So that is the evidence, the unassailable evidence of hypocrisy. 1 joke should be arrested, another joke is proof that we're turning into North Korea. It's insane. Not quite as insane as something else that happened at the Reform Conference in Birmingham this weekend, but it is insane to think that this at the moment is pretty much the only corner of the media pointing out the absurd hypocrisy of those 3 elements, the comedy writer, the comedian and the comedy politician, claiming that one of them is an arrestable offence and the other fella getting arrested is proof that we're turning into North Korea. So that's my first question and my last. Why are they doing it? Why is there this growing call or this growing claim that our free speech in this country is under threat? Why do you think it is? What is going on? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. But the second bit of the phone in And you may need to pay a little bit more attention than you usually do on this, because the detail is important. This looks at Mark Rowley essentially asking for the Metropolitan Police in particular and the police in general to be excused the job of policing the internet. It's the sort of non-crime hate incidents or whatever it is. If you post something horrible about me on social media and I call the police as it stands are required to investigate, to knock on my door or to knock on your door and talk to you to look into it. And again, Graham Linehan comes into this, but not in contrast to Joe Brand, rather in contrast to Lucy Connolly. So the bloke who thought Joe Brand should be arrested for a joke should literally be, the police should be called, invited onto stage this weekend, or at least had on stage at his conference, the woman who called for entirely innocent people to be burned alive in their beds and stressed that she really meant it. She added, for the avoidance of doubt, if this makes me racist, so be it. In other words, I fully accept that I'm calling upon you to burn people of a certain ethnicity to death, and I owned that. It's why she had little choice but to plead guilty when she went to court. But this is being, and you might have thought her sentencing was excessive, that's a different question. This is being used as evidence of a growing free speech crisis. And it makes no sense when you stop and think about it. What, and this is something that you may not have thought about before, but I want you to think about it now. Mark Rowley doesn't think, obviously, if you read between the lines, that the police should have arrested Graham Linehan on Friday. 5 officers, armed, inevitably, because they were at Heathrow, so I don't read too much into that. 5 of them. He's a big lad. He's got a reputation for being quite easy to anger, something that he wouldn't deny himself, but still, 5 armed officers must be a very frightening sight to see, regardless what you think about his history and interventions in public discourse. The idea that he got arrested for what are, I think, fairly obviously jokes, not nice jokes, offensive jokes, not jokes that you'd necessarily laugh at, but let's call them attempted jokes, okay? It's something that the police don't feel that they should be doing. And yet, obviously, if I were to post your address online and, I don't know, instructions on how to make a petrol bomb, perhaps, or simply an encouragement to you to go and burn to death everybody of from a certain demographic, everybody of a certain characteristic, everybody in a certain type of building, and there was a realistic prospect of that happening, then the incitement to violence or the incitement to racial hatred becomes impossible to ignore. And I don't know what I would do if I was a police. I don't know whose job it should be to tell the difference. I don't know how this works. So the question that I think will be quite easy to answer, at least I hope it's quite easy to answer, is this one. Why are they doing this? 0345 6060 973. JD Vance is doing it. Nigel Farage is doing it. The Daily Telegraph is doing. Why are they doing it? You've got more freedom in this country than almost anywhere else in the world, certainly at any other point in history. There is an issue. There is a wrinkle in legislation that was essentially championed by the last few Tory governments because they were trying to deal with stuff happening online. And the simple answer, the simple idea that you shouldn't be able to do anything online that you can't shout from the rooftop seems to be under threat. So why are they doing this? Why would JD Vance claim that you had fewer freedoms in the United Kingdom than you do in Vladimir Putin's Russia or China at the moment? Why? 0345 6060 973. And then the second question becomes, what tweets or what social media posts should get you arrested? Because I can't answer that question. I want you to give me a 1-sentence or a 2-sentence analysis of the threshold for getting arrested. Should you be able to say absolutely anything you want on social media, as some people seem to be suggesting? In which case, why can't I do it on the radio? Or should there be a line which you're not allowed to cross? I want you to have a really good go at telling me where that line is. So question number one, why are they doing this? Why are they pretending that our wonderful, liberal, free country is North Korea? 03456060973. And if you accept that some of the arrests have been a little excessive, perhaps not quite as excessive as some of the arrests this weekend, but excessive, where is the line? What should you not? How would you define the things you should not be allowed to say on social media? You can come at it from whatever angle you want. You can argue that you should be able to say whatever you please, but that would involve lies and incitements, and you'd have to tell me why you think that would improve our lives or public discourse. It's 12:26. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Let's go to Guildford. Jackie's there. Jackie, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I suddenly had a bit of a light bulb moment this morning when you were talking about because there is such a massive hoo-ha about free speech at the moment, and I suddenly thought back to when I did law at A-level.
Oh, yes.
And I thought to myself, hold on a minute. In the US, companies are considered to be people when it's in the context of lobbying, giving money to political systems and parties, and it's in law it is actually a form of free speech.
Right. Oh, okay.
And so in some of the key Supreme Court cases that have been laid down, there have been decisions that have ensured and laid in stone the right for corporate and union spending on political campaigns to be a form of free speech and to not be limited. And that's how the political system in the USA has become so kind of saturated with money from lobbyists, and how it's such a massive industry, and it's protected under free speech. It's considered to be free speech because corporations have been given they're treated as artificial persons, and persons have the right to free speech. And so it's all kind of wrapped up in that. And I wonder if this whole kind of medley of things around free speech and this whole kind of attack on it, we haven't got free, is actually bigger than just the surface that we all see as
it definitely
people.
is, and you're tugging at a couple of threads of what they may be up to. But what would, and it may be that we're crediting them with too much intellectual sophistication. What is the end game? What are they aiming for? Is it simply to protect those guys that we just heard in the Oval Office going down on both knees to tell Donald Trump how wonderful he is, with their, presumably, you have to hope, with their fingers crossed behind their back at least? Is it just to ensure that they don't have to foot the bill for better regulating the internet?
Well, partly, but I was thinking with specifically towards Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, because they seem to be trying so hard to bring Americanisms to the UK. I wondered if he sees himself to be a prospective political power, i.e. maybe even a prime minister in the future. Yes. Is it that he's trying to engineer an environment where the lobbying of his ability to receive money from corporations and individuals is much less regulated than it currently is in our parliament, and it's much more sort of conducive to him being able to...
There's not going to be... That's a really thoughtful contribution. It's not going to be one answer then, is it? So it's not going to be my theory, which is it's all about... Not exclusively my theory. It's all about saving them the cost and faff of actually regulating their platforms to protect our children, all our children. It could include what you suggest about wanting to change the nature of our political discourse. But then you got the other one, which is if you look at Donald Trump and similar politicians, Farage, for example, he's been caught lying again about his housing arrangements, of course, in the last few days. They want to be free to lie. Often when I hear people from one side of our political divide shouting about free speech, it's that they want to be free to lie. They had that weird bloke on stage at the Reform Conference claiming that the King's cancer was caused by vaccines. And that should, some of this stuff should probably be governed by legislation. But if you want to be free to claim that immigrants are eating cats and dogs, you kind of need to kill the truth completely in the online space and make it a place where people can say that the earth is flat, that up is down, and that black is white. So it could be all three of those and more.
Mm.
Speaking of Farage, did you watch any footage of the events in Birmingham this weekend?
I honestly, he just makes me so sick.
Oh.
I can barely watch him,
Well,
but
you-
I kind of pick up snippets around.
But
and,
you missed the karaoke bit, did you?
I did. I actually saw the committee, him facing the committee in the US and getting his.
Yes, that was pretty powerful. Someone actually
Yeah.
seeing him for exactly
and
what
I
he is.
really, really enjoyed that,
I
and
may
I'd
play-
like
I'll
to
tell
see a
you
bit
what,
more of that.
Well, I might play it out again after this, actually. But before I do that, I want to play you this, and you're not going to thank me for it, Jackie. But are you ready? This actually
Yeah.
happened
Yeah.
at the party conference of a party that aspires to govern this country, and this contributor is currently, I mean, arguably the most senior person in their ranks with regards to ministerial experience, or well, it could possibly be Nadine Dorries. It's either Nadine Dorries or
Dame Andrea Jenkins.
So hang on, before we go to the news headlines, that was real. Has that changed your view, Jackie, at all of the organisation? Did you enjoy that, Jackie?
It's really special. Thanks very much.
You're very welcome. It's 12:32. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I'm told that the rendition of God Save the Queen was arguably even worse, and my apologies. I don't know whether I should have provided a trigger warning to that, or some form of well, talk about on Online Safety Day. You wouldn't want to stumble across that on the internet, would you? Unprompted. And it is to the internet that we return, looking at this question of what you should and should not be allowed to say on social media. Should it really be any different from this? If I told you that that vaccines, actually, I mean, Ofcom has dropped the ball a little bit on that, hasn't it, with regard to one or two broadcasters. But should I be able to tell you things that are categorically not true on the radio? Answer no. Not consciously, not knowingly. I might tell you something that turns out not to be true later, and then I have usually a responsibility to correct it. But should I be able to incite violence? Or do you know that the Rwandan genocide was driven in large part by radio? The people going on the radio in Rwanda encouraging genocide, encouraging violence, neighbour upon neighbour, encouraging people to turn on each other. And it happened on the radio. Now, I don't think you think I should be allowed to do that. Should I be allowed to say on the radio, go and set fire to building X, Y and Z? Go out and do this. So why would anybody think that I should be allowed to do it on social media? That's the question. It's not rhetorical. Why do people want this to happen? Why are people claiming that we've got a free speech problem? Be God Save the King. My apologies, not God Save the Queen. I wonder how long it takes for that to actually kick in. Why are they doing it? Why are they pretending that we've got a major free speech problem? And what is it designed to achieve? And then the second bit of the question essentially becomes, what should Mark Rowley get if he's had enough, understandably, of having to go and knock on someone's door every time a non-crime hate incident occurs, and then, you know, if you've committed a crime, you'll be charged and potentially prosecuted. If you happened, you'll be free to go about your business. So in the great scheme of things, it's not a very big deal, but it must be a fairly big deal if it happens to you. So what should you not be allowed to say? Where should that line be? 12:38 is the time. Sam's in Penge. Sam, what would you like to say?
First of all, I'd like to just say I think Nigel Farage is a fish cake.
That's a nice word. Is that? I mean, that's a negative or a positive? It might, because I'm not very young. That might be youth speak for very cool dude.
In South London, that's terrible.
Is it? All right. Well, I hope it's not rude. If it's rude, I apologise on all our behalves. Carry on, Sam.
Yeah, I'm Albanian, so he really ticked me off this weekend. But it is what it is.
Well, what did he do with regards to Albanians?
Well, he's telling everybody at that conference how he's going to fill up a plane on his way to visit the foreign ambassador or something like that. So yeah.
Okay. Well, at least he didn't sing. At least he didn't sing.
Yeah, at least he didn't sing. There's a clip going around on the internet. I don't know if you've seen it. They're like on a news panel from a TV show called The Good Fight, and there's a white guy on the panel, and he's kind of questioning the black people on the panel why he can't say the N-word.
Right.
And the black guy just flat out says, "Well, go ahead, say it. Just say it. Say it right now." And the guy basically says, "Well, no, I don't want to say it here right now in front of you." And, But the guy says, "Well, why not? Just say it. If you want to say it so bad, just say it." And this is the exact same thing that we have with J.D. Vance, with Nigel Farage going over there and telling them that we're losing freedom of speech. They want to be able to say the things that... Me personally, I don't think it should get them arrested, but they should lose their jobs. They should, like what they do in America, where like somebody's been racially abused or whatever the case is, and then the internet does its thing and they go and lose their job. Because if you arrest everybody who says something on the internet, do you know what I mean? We'll just
no, this is answer number 4. I mean, and we've missed out the simple profitability of it all. There's just a lot more money in engagement. People seem to be spending a lot more time on places where they're allowed to be absolutely hideous. Some of the racism on Elon Musk's platform now is off the charts. I haven't seen anything with the N-word, but there's loads. Well, I have seen some, but most recently it's the P word, and people saying on there without getting into any trouble at all, "Go home, P word" to British people. So part of the drive here from some of the people pretending that the UK is turning into North Korea is a desire to return to a sort of 1950s level of racist rhetoric, to be allowed to say things that are profoundly and deliberately offensive and obviously racist. Like Lucy Connolly, of course, that's where the thing joins up. She literally says, "If this makes me a racist, so be it." Therefore, racists have turned her into a folk heroine.
They're trying to convince us that there was a time when it was better for them, in the 50s and 60s, where 3 households would share one toilet in South London.
Well, I mean, they're welcome to do that, but they're trying to blame it on people who don't look like them. That's why things are not good now.
We're led to believe that the nurse in the hospital is the one who's here taking your job, and the doctor who's looking after your mum, or the person in the nursing home who's looking after your nan that you haven't seen in 6 months. Do you know what I mean? So it's we're being patronised by the right to tell us that, we don't want you here. We want our language spoken, this, that, and the other. I kind of get it. I kind of get it where they're coming from, because to them they've been sold a lie that you're on the decline. You're being overtaken by the Muslims. They want Sharia law. You hear it so often, and especially now you drive around South London, you see the flags popping up. And it's the same people who cut down these ULEZ cameras that are putting the flags up. So, do you know what I mean? It's like...
I think you might be right. I hadn't thought of that connection before. So I like this analysis because it speaks to a sort of desire simply to change the rules of engagement. If I'm unhappy about the way that Twitter is going, because it seems to be a place where racism is frowned upon, where you could lose your account for incitement to racial hatred, where you cannot use certain words, for example, the P word or the N word, and I don't like that, and I really want it to turn into sort of the online equivalent of apartheid-era South Africa, then I'll just buy it. And I'll change the rules, and I'll change the algorithms, and I'll change everything so that you can use the P word, you can use the N word, you can incite racial hatred, which might get you arrested, but it's not going to get you into any trouble with the powers that be at social media headquarters. But if you want to change an entire society, you can't buy it, so you have to seed what they're seeding now, which is the idea that you are being prevented from saying things that you should be allowed to say without actually owning up to what those things are.
over the course of history, we've learned how propaganda is used to trick those who want to be tricked. Because a person who doesn't believe in the lie can see through it all and they'll run away. There was people that defected from Germany from the early 40s, from like 33, 34. They ran over to the West and they said, guys, what's going on over there is crazy. Don't let it come over here. And unfortunately, in this day and age, we don't have that opportunity because the guy online is getting paid by somebody to say this kind of stuff.
And the attention economy, that is all we have to offer these people is our attention. The attention is the commodity. Sam, that was brilliant. Thank you. Knitted together quite a few of the themes that are clearly in play here. The biggest one of all, what's in it for them? Why are they trying to do it? Could well be that. I mean, there's the money, there's the impunity, but ideally, I mean, you want to be able to say things that are much worse than they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. So if you want to go online and say this country has been damaged by immigration, absolutely you should be able to, just as someone else should be able to respond by asking you for evidence and then checking the evidence and working it. But if you go on air and say this country has been damaged by immigration, therefore we should start killing immigrants, you shouldn't be able to say that. Or should you? Because if you're allowed to say we should be deporting them, why are you not allowed to say we should be killing them? Genuine question. What's your answer? It's coming up to 1:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm listening. I'm going to come back to this again and again and again because it's going to crystallise in the coming months. Callers like Sam help us see some of the things that are missing. But and callers like Jackie in Guildford. But why are they doing it? And the question of why all of these people who claim to be patriots are painting our country in such a hideous way is quite easy to answer. They are largely massive racists who are trying to pretend that the problems inflicted upon these islands by 14 years of Tory rule have somehow been caused by people who weren't born here, as opposed to by the people who've been in charge for 14 years. But the freedom of speech bit, why are they doing it? Why would a man who thinks that a comedian should be arrested for doing a joke suddenly pretend that he thinks a comedian should not be arrested for doing a joke? Why are they doing it? Not there yet. They're getting better, though. But we will return to this territory. I've got that second interview, or at least that second story coming up next, the one that I mentioned to you about that first call of the day that we took, where the word desensitised appeared again and again and again. Two colleagues of mine have looked at the experiences of young people, one in particular who, well, can tell us precisely what that means and precisely what it involves and precisely where it leads. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
An investigation that's been undertaken by my colleagues Helen Hoddinott and Lauren Eales, and Helen is with me now. What have we found? What have you found?
Yeah, so these figures, according to official police data from 2023, show that out of the 22,000 cases where the age was recorded, over 70% of the offenders were under the age of 18. That's more than 15,000 offenders. And more often than not, they're looking at content of children of a fairly similar age. In the vast majority of these cases, the perpetrator's age was within 3 years of their victim, but it is, of course, illegal regardless, with potentially awful repercussions for the victims. And what is alarming is the number of these child offenders who will be stumbling across illegal content online, viewing it, perhaps not realising that they're either committing a crime or the severity of the crime they're committing. And it can be as simple as opening links that they found on social media. We have been speaking to one of those offenders. Alan was convicted in April this year for possession of indecent images of children after a 2-year investigation. He's 19 now. He was 17 years old when police knocked on the door of his family home in southwest England.
The police, they had a warrant to enter my house. They opened the door and they immediately just entered the house without asking, rushed upstairs to get to me. They told me not to touch any devices. At first I was confused, but they gathered everyone downstairs. You know, I was underage at the time, and, you know, they told me pretty much, you know, your son has been in possession of indecent images. I'm not 100% sure how the police found out. They didn't really tell me.
So Alan had been accessing nude images of girls aged between 14 and 17 years old. He describes it as the culmination of a habit that had been forming for years. He says he was just 8 when he first came across pornographic material on a social media platform, but says that he quickly became addicted to it and it escalated over time into criminal activity.
I was never really accessing indecent images purposefully. It was more so something I stumbled across on Twitter. There was these links that, redirected you to another website, and that's where everything could be found. There was no warning or whatever. I remember I closed the website, but then I ended up going back, out of curiosity. I was wondering what was on there, and it came down to me accessing that sort of content almost 3 to 4 times a week. A lot of young people, really young, do access pornography simply because of how open it is, and it is something that is addicting. A lot of the times it does get worse and worse until people start accessing illegal content.
So Twitter X has not responded to our request for a comment on that claim. Alan's case went to Crown Court. He was handed a 24-week prison sentence, suspended for 12 months alongside 100 hours of community service and a fine. And he'll be on the sex offender register for another 7 years and 8 months. He says he has spent time reflecting on his crimes.
It makes me feel more disgusted than anything. I do feel guilt for everything. I finished all my unpaid work recently. I've paid off my fine. Right now, I just go to probation. We're doing a accredited program. Right now, we're on the section regarding online safety. The government is getting a lot of criticism because if you want to access a pornographic website, you have to upload a picture of your ID. A lot of people criticize that, but I think it's great.
And of course, James, as more and more children have gained almost unfettered access to the internet, this has become a much bigger problem. Solicitor Marcus Johnston specialises in child sexual offences. He's told LBC they're now getting calls almost every day from the parents of children who have been put under investigation for accessing underage images.
Parents are scared out of their minds as to what to do, but the parents generally believe that their child has done nothing wrong. Often they will say, well, look, he was just looking for girls his own age. I think most of the children that I deal with are really just inquisitive, and they're looking for, boys. It's usually boys that are caught with this, but it's usually boys looking for girls around their own age.
And while it would feel terrifying for families, Assistant Chief Constable Alistair Simpson, the National Police Chiefs Council's online child abuse lead, has told us the police response is proportionate when the offences of these teenagers, these children, are of a low level.
What I would say is that the police response is very proportionate. Children particularly are unlikely to be getting prison sentences simply for accessing or sharing indecent images of children. Most of the children for the non-aggravated offences, most of them are dealt with as children, and actually there's no further action taken in many of those cases.
And it comes with a warning that officers are patrolling all corners of the internet. They are looking out offenders causing the most harm. And as we now know, a lot of those, a high proportion, are children themselves.
It's extraordinary how much of this tallied with the conversation well, not extraordinary, I suppose. It fits perfectly with the conversations we were having in the first hour of the programme, including vocabulary. That word you used, stumble. That's what the Act is designed to do, isn't it? To minimise the likelihood of stumbling into this stuff. And then chapter 2 of that story, as you've discovered and as Ellen and some of the other people you've spoken to can attest, is searching. I know that there's a child therapist quoted in your article as well who describes his own surprise at how easy it is sometimes to when the young people tell him, I was just looking for people my own age. And the shock at how easy it is to then discover indecent images online. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is, and it is that part of it that they may not know that they are actually carrying out an illegal activity. And then the shock, Alan described how when the police came to the door, he didn't actually know why they were there until they'd kind of gathered his family downstairs and told them that it was for indecent images of children.
And which makes them immediately think of a different demographic, a different age group. And that line, again, from the therapist about I was looking at people my own age, you can see why they don't fully appreciate the crime that they're committing until you think of it from the photographed person's point of view. Helen, thank you. And indeed, your and my LBC colleague Lauren Eales, you can find this article written up at greater length on the LBC app. Again, you know, I make this point repeatedly. It's another thing that parents need to be looking out for. Speaking of which, also on the LBC app is an article by our colleague Natasha Devon about the sort of thing that that parents can do, about the things that you can teach young people, and indeed young people need to be aware of themselves. It's coming up to 12:57. I don't think I'm going to have time to squeeze in Johnny in Nuremberg, am I? Or can I give him? Will he be able to do it in a minute? Can you make a powerful point in a single minute, Johnny, on the question of why we're enduring this horrific narrative of free speech threats?
Yeah. I mean, what I can say very quickly is that the Holocaust didn't start with Auschwitz, that the Holocaust didn't start with people being shot somewhere in Russia or something like that. It started with hate speech. It started with people claiming that other people should be killed for whoever they are, whatever color of their skin they have, or whatever color of
their
whatever
religion
culture
or their
they have.
ethnicity, and being free to say that publicly was the sort of crikey. You've done an amazing job there, and I did give you the parameters of doing it within a minute, and that now is going to leave me thinking more deeply about the subject for the rest of today. I promise you, Johnny, that the next time you ring into the programme, you will get rather more time than that. But I didn't want to go without pointing out something. How do you phrase this? Every time you think things have got, and an awful lot of you are demanding that I never play that footage that of what's her name again? It's not Andrea Ledson. Andrea Jenkins singing at the Reform UK. Could have been worse. Could have been Nadine Dorries. But I won't ever play it again, but I am going to have to play you something else, because I said by accident that she'd sung God Save the Queen, which obviously is a relatively easy mistake to make when the king is recently installed on the throne and you've spent 53 years or 52 years referring to the Queen. If I had been on stage in front of thousands of people and the world's television cameras when I made that mistake, it would have been altogether more embarrassing. So when I corrected myself and said, of course, she didn't sing God Save the Queen, she sang God Save the King, because you just wouldn't make that mistake in front of the world's television cameras on a stage in front of thousands of people in Birmingham when you're part of a party that is desperately trying to persuade people that you should be taken seriously and have whatever it is you need to govern.
God save our gracious King, long live
So there it is. I swear I will never play any more of her singing again. If you missed any of today's show, you know I will.
I was about
If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on all the top stories and opinions. You can put your news categories in the order you want. You can read that article by Natasha Devon and indeed the one by Helen and Lauren as well. Not to mention pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts, including my rather splendid conversation with Meetali Jain, the classicist and former comedian, which is on full disclosure this week. So do download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4. But now it's time for Sheila who is actually going to sing. It's Sheila Fogarty with...
never going to happen. Although I did once sing on this programme. Remember, we were talking about that beautiful South song, Jennifer. I'm doing it again.
Alison, Philippa Sue.
Yeah.
This is a lovely song.
Someone said I had a nice voice.
Who was that then?
I don't know, some random. I explained that it was all down to the microphone. Quality of the microphone. Yeah.
James O'Brien on LBC.